The sound of chainsaws ripping through wood jolted me awake at 7 in the morning on what was supposed to be my first Saturday off in 3 weeks. I jumped out of bed, threw on yesterday's jeans and a hoodie, and bolted outside my house in Wilsonville, Oregon, expecting to see a neighbor dealing with a fallen tree. What I found instead made my blood run cold. 3 men in neon vests stood at the edge of my property line, taking down my evergreen trees. Not just any trees. The 40-foot Douglas firs that I had specifically paid to have planted when I bought this place 5 years ago. The same trees that provided privacy from the main road and had cost me nearly $10,000 to have professionally installed and maintained. I watched in horror as one massive trunk crashed to the ground with a thunderous boom. I sprinted across my lawn, waving my arms. "Hey, stop! What the hell are you doing?" The nearest worker killed his chainsaw and lifted his safety goggles. He looked at me with confusion. "We're clearing these trees for the HOA. Got a work order right here." "Those are my trees, on my property," I shouted, my voice cracking with disbelief. The worker's face went pale. He pulled out a clipboard from his truck and studied it. His 2 companions had stopped working now, both staring at our exchange. "It says here that the Pinecrest HOA authorized removal of evergreens along this section for the Community Firewood Initiative." "Community Firewood Initiative," I repeated, feeling like I had stepped into some bizarre alternate reality. "This is my private property. I never authorized anything." A white Lexus SUV pulled up to the curb and out stepped Patricia Montgomery, the HOA president. She was exactly what you would picture when someone says, HOA president. Mid-50s, bleached blonde hair cut in an aggressive bob, wearing a velour tracksuit despite it being 40 degrees outside, and carrying a designer purse that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Is there a problem here?" Patricia asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Yes, there's a problem," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "These men are cutting down my trees." Patricia pulled out her phone and made a show of scrolling through it. "According to our records, Yates Emerson, these trees violate Code Section 12.7 of the Pinecrest HOA bylaws. They exceed the maximum height for evergreens in residential zones and block the sightline from the community entrance." I stared at her. "I don't care what your records say. These trees are on my property, well within my property lines, and I bought this house before your ridiculous height restrictions were even voted on. I'm grandfathered in." "Actually," Patricia said, adjusting her oversized sunglasses, "the new bylaws passed last month apply to all properties retroactively. The vote was unanimous among board members. I never received notice of any vote. We sent emails to all residents." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "I check my email religiously. I never got anything." I pulled out my phone to check right there, searching through every folder. Nothing. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Regardless, the decision has been made. These trees are being removed for the good of the community. We have several elderly residents who have requested firewood for the winter, and this solves 2 problems at once." I looked at the 3 workers, who were now standing around awkwardly, clearly wanting no part of this confrontation. Then I looked at the damage. They had already taken down 4 of my 8 trees. The stumps sat there like tombstones. "Stop all work immediately," I said to the crew. "If you cut down 1 more tree, I'll sue your company and every person here individually." The lead worker looked at Patricia, then back at me. "Madam, we need to sort this out. We're not cutting anything else until you 2 figure out who actually owns this property." Patricia's face turned red. "I am the HOA president, and I am telling you to continue your work. And I'm the property owner telling you that you're committing destruction of property and theft," I countered. "Those trees you already cut. I want them left exactly where they are. Nobody touches them." The lead worker nodded slowly. "We're going to pack up and leave. You folks need to handle this legally. Sorry, but we're not getting in the middle of a lawsuit." Within 10 minutes, the work crew had loaded their equipment and driven off, leaving 4 massive tree trunks lying across my lawn like fallen soldiers. Patricia stood there, her arms crossed, fury radiating from her. "You're making a huge mistake, Yates," she said. "The HOA has lawyers, very good lawyers. You'll end up paying for the removal anyway, plus legal fees." "Get off my property," I said quietly. She turned on her heel and marched back to her Lexus, peeling out with enough force to leave rubber marks on the street. I stood there in my yard, looking at the destruction, and pulled out my phone. The first call was to a lawyer. The second would be to a property surveyor to document everything. The third would be to my insurance company. But first, I needed photos. Lots and lots of photos. I spent the next hour documenting every angle of the damage. I took wide shots showing the trees in relation to my house and property markers. I took close-ups of the stumps, clearly showing they were well within my property line. I took photos of the tire tracks from the work trucks, the scattered wood chips, the gouges in my lawn from where the trees had fallen. I even took a video walking around the entire perimeter of my property, narrating what had happened. My neighbor, David Chen, came out of his house and walked over. He was a software engineer who worked from home and had become a good friend since I moved in. "Dude, what happened?" he asked, staring at the carnage. I explained the whole situation. David's expression went from confusion to anger on my behalf. "That's insane," he said. "Those trees were gorgeous, and I never got any email about a vote either." "You're on the HOA email list, supposedly. I get their monthly newsletter reminding us about trash day and complaining about people parking RVs on the street, but nothing about any vote to change tree height restrictions." This was useful information. I made a mental note to ask other neighbors if they had received anything about this vote. "I'm calling Mitchell Graves," I said. Mitchell was a property lawyer who had helped me with my house purchase. "This is going to get ugly." David nodded. "Let me know if you need me to testify or whatever. I saw the whole thing from my office window. I've got video too, actually. My home security camera faces the street." I could have hugged him. "David, you're a lifesaver. Can you send me that footage?" Already on it. By noon, I had an emergency appointment scheduled with Mitchell Graves for 2 o'clock that afternoon. I spent the time between gathering every document I had related to my property. The original deed, the survey from when I bought the house, receipts for the tree installation, maintenance records, everything. I also printed out every HOA email I had ever received, noting that none of them mentioned any special meetings or votes about tree height restrictions. Mitchell's office was in downtown Portland, a 30-minute drive from Wilsonville. He practiced out of a small firm that specialized in property disputes, which made him perfect for this situation. When I arrived, his paralegal, an efficient-looking woman in her 30s, immediately showed me into his office. Mitchell was in his early 50s, with graying hair and glasses that made him look exactly like what he was. A detail-oriented lawyer who loved finding loopholes and fighting for underdogs. He had helped me navigate a complex easement issue when I bought my house, and I had trusted him ever since. "Yates," he said, shaking my hand and gesturing to a chair. "Tell me everything." I laid out the whole story, showing him the photos and videos on my phone. His expression grew darker with each detail. "Did you sign anything when you bought your house acknowledging HOA rules about tree heights?" he asked. "No. The HOA existed, but it was basically dormant. They collected dues for maintaining the community entrance sign and the small park at the end of the development. No enforcement of anything. And when did Patricia Montgomery become president? About 18 months ago. Since then, she's been on a power trip. She fined the Johnsons for having their garage door open too long. She tried to make the Patels repaint their house because the yellow was not community appropriate. She sent violation notices to at least 6 households for having decorative rocks instead of bark dust in their flower beds. Mitchell typed notes into his computer. Has anyone successfully fought her? The Patels did. They told her to pound sand and she backed down. But most people just comply because it's easier than fighting. Except you cut down your trees before you could refuse, Mitchell said. He leaned back in his chair. Okay, here's what we're dealing with. They've committed criminal destruction of property, possibly theft if they intended to take the wood, and trespassing. On the civil side, you have a slam dunk case for damages. The question is how much? I paid $9,000 for those trees 5 years ago. Mature trees are worth significantly more than what you paid to have them planted, Mitchell explained. There's something called the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers formula. We'll need to hire an arborist to assess the actual value, but I'd estimate you're looking at somewhere between $30,000 and $70,000 in damages, potentially more. I felt dizzy. $70,000. Mature trees are incredibly valuable, especially on residential property. They provide privacy, reduce noise pollution, increase property value, and take decades to replace. Oregon law allows for treble damages in cases of intentional tree removal, which means if a court finds the HOA acted willfully, you could be awarded triple the actual value of the trees. So we're talking potentially over $200,000. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Mitchell cautioned. But yes, that's theoretically possible. More realistically, I'd say you're looking at $50,000 to $80,000 in total damages and legal fees, which the HOA would be responsible for paying. He pulled up a form on his computer. Here's what we need to do immediately. First, I'm filing for an emergency restraining order to prevent any further tree removal or property access by the HOA or their contractors. Second, we're sending a cease and desist letter via certified mail and email to Patricia Montgomery and every member of the HOA board. Third, we're hiring an arborist to assess damages. Fourth, we're going to request all HOA records related to this supposed vote and any communications about your property. What are the chances they actually held a legal vote? I asked. Mitchell's expression was grim. Based on what you've told me, I'd say slim to none. Oregon law requires HOAs to provide notice of any special meetings or bylaw changes at least 14 days in advance. Notice must be sent via mail or email to every household. And they need a quorum of homeowners to vote, not just the board members. If they claim the vote was unanimous among board members, that tells me they never put it to the general membership. So they just made it up, quite possibly. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Mitchell filed the restraining order, which was granted within 24 hours. The arborist, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in tree valuation, came out to assess the damage. She spent 3 hours measuring stumps, taking soil samples, examining the remaining trees and documenting everything. When she finished, she sat down with me at my kitchen table to go over her preliminary findings. "Mr. Emerson, these were exceptional specimens," she said. Douglas firs of this size and health are rare in residential settings. Based on the trunk diameter, growth rings, and overall condition, I estimate these trees were approximately 60 years old when they were transplanted to your property. 60 years. The company told me they were mature trees, but I didn't realize they were that old. Transplanting trees of this age is expensive and requires specialized equipment, which explains your installation cost. Now, for valuation purposes, I use the trunk formula method approved by the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers. Each tree, based on its size, species, condition, and location, has a base value. Then we apply multipliers for factors like contribution to the property. She showed me her calculations. The numbers were staggering. Each tree has a base value of approximately $12,000. Multiply by 4 trees and we're at $48,000. However, because these trees provided significant privacy screening, noise reduction, and aesthetic value, and because they're irreplaceable within any reasonable time frame, I'm applying a location multiplier of 1.2. That brings the total to $57,600. I sat back in my chair. And Oregon law allows for triple damages. If the court finds the removal was willful and malicious, yes, but that's for the lawyers and judges to determine. My job is to assess the actual value of what you lost. What about the remaining 4 trees? Do they need to come down? Dr. Chen shook her head. They're healthy and stable. There's no reason to remove them. In fact, I'd recommend protecting them carefully. They've increased significantly in value now that the others are gone. After she left, I sat in my living room and stared out at what remained of my privacy screen. The 4 remaining trees looked lonely without their companions. Sunlight streamed in through gaps that had never existed before. I could hear traffic from the main road clearly for the first time in years. The loss felt personal, like someone had come into my home and destroyed family heirlooms. My phone rang. It was Mitchell. The HOA's lawyer called me, he said. They want to settle. Already? Patricia Montgomery panicked when she got the restraining order. Apparently, she didn't consult the HOA's actual lawyer before authorizing the tree removal. She made this decision unilaterally and forged approval documents. She forged documents, according to their lawyer, yes. He's been the HOA's attorney for 10 years, and he was blindsided by this whole thing. When he found out what she did, he immediately recommended they settle to avoid criminal charges. What are they offering? $20,000. I laughed bitterly. The trees alone are worth $57,000, according to the arborist. Exactly what I told them. I countered with $85,000 to cover the tree value, your legal fees, the cost of privacy fencing until replacement trees mature, and compensation for loss of property value and enjoyment. What did they say? They're discussing it with their insurance company. Patricia's lawyer wanted me to know that she's been removed as HOA president, and the board is considering pressing charges against her for fraud and unauthorized use of HOA funds. This was moving faster than I had expected. So, what happens now? We wait. Their insurance company has 7 days to respond to our demand. If they refuse, we file a lawsuit. Given the evidence we have, including your neighbor's security footage and the arborist's report, I'm confident we'll prevail. The question is whether they want to settle now or pay significantly more after a trial. That evening, David came over with a 6-pack of beer. We sat on my back deck, which now had an unwelcome view of the street. "This is so bizarre," David said. "I've been asking around the neighborhood. Nobody got any notice about a vote. In fact, the Hendersons told me they specifically asked Patricia about the tree height rules when they planted some cedars last spring, and she said there were no restrictions. So she definitely lied. Completely. And get this. Remember Bob Marshall, 3 houses down? He's on the HOA board. He told me today that Patricia called an emergency board meeting 2 weeks ago, but it was supposedly about the budget for repaving the entrance road. No mention of trees. He says she never brought up your property or any bylaw changes. This was gold. Would he be willing to testify to that? He already called your lawyer. Mitchell has his statement. The pieces were falling into place. Patricia had acted entirely on her own, possibly believing that her authority as HOA president gave her unlimited power over the community. Instead, she had committed fraud and property destruction, putting the entire HOA at legal risk. 3 days later, Mitchell called with news. "They've accepted our settlement offer," he said. $85,000, $57,600 for the tree value, $18,000 for your legal fees and costs, and the remainder for your trouble and loss of property enjoyment. They're also paying for a 6-foot privacy fence to be installed along your property line until replacement trees can mature. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. And Patricia? The HOA board voted unanimously to pursue criminal charges against her for fraud and embezzlement. Turns out she used HOA funds to pay for the tree removal without board approval, which is a crime in Oregon. The district attorney's office is reviewing the case. What about the tree removal company? They are in the clear. They had what appeared to be legitimate work orders and had no reason to believe they weren't authorized. Patricia forged your signature on a consent form. She forged my signature, multiple times apparently. She created a paper trail to make it look like you had requested the removal and then changed your mind. When the board started investigating after the restraining order, they found a whole file of forged documents. I shook my head in disbelief. Why would she go to such lengths? According to Bob Marshall, Patricia owns the lot directly behind yours. She wanted your trees removed because they blocked her view of Mount Hood. She tried to get board approval, but everyone said no because the trees were on your property. So she decided to do it anyway and fabricate a legal justification after the fact. The pettiness of it was astounding. She had destroyed $57,000 worth of mature trees because they blocked her view. Not her property, not her trees, just her desire to see mountains in the distance. "When do I get the settlement money?" I asked. "The HOA's insurance company is cutting the check this week. You should have it within 10 days. They're also sending a contractor out next week to install the fence. You'll need to approve the design and placement. What happens if Patricia doesn't face criminal charges? Then you could pursue a personal lawsuit against her for additional damages. But let's see what the DA decides. Forging documents and embezzling HOA funds are serious crimes. She's looking at potential jail time." That weekend, I received a certified letter from the Pinecrest HOA. It was an official apology signed by all 5 remaining board members, acknowledging that Patricia Montgomery had acted without authorization and that I had been wronged. They assured me that new oversight procedures were being implemented to prevent any single board member from having unilateral authority over community decisions. The letter felt hollow. No apology could bring back 60-year-old trees that had taken decades to reach their full majesty. But at least the community was acknowledging the wrong and taking steps to prevent future abuse. I also received a personal letter, hand-delivered to my mailbox. It was from Patricia. The note was brief and passive-aggressive, exactly what I would have expected. She claimed she had acted in the best interests of the community, that she had believed the trees posed a safety risk during windstorms, and that she was disappointed I had chosen to involve lawyers instead of working things out neighborly. She suggested I was being greedy by demanding such a large settlement and implied that I had somehow trapped her into making a mistake. I showed the letter to Mitchell, who read it and immediately made a copy. "This is incredible," he said. "She's admitting to the tree removal and trying to justify it, but without actually apologizing or taking responsibility. If the DA needs any more evidence that she knew what she was doing was wrong but did it anyway, this letter is perfect." Should I respond? Absolutely not. Any communication with her should go through lawyers. Don't give her ammunition to claim you threatened or harassed her. The settlement check arrived 9 days later. $85,000. I deposited it immediately and then sat down to figure out what to do next. The fence installation began the following Monday. The contractor, a friendly guy named Marcus, showed me several design options. I chose a cedar privacy fence with a natural stain that would complement the remaining trees. It would run along the front of my property where the trees had been, providing immediate privacy while I decided what to do about replacements. How long would it take for new trees to reach the height the old ones were? I asked Dr. Chen when she came by to check on the remaining trees. "Douglas firs grow about 2 feet per year under ideal conditions," she said. "To reach 40 feet, you're looking at 20 years minimum, possibly longer depending on conditions." 20 years. I was 34 years old. I would be in my 50s before replacement trees reached the height of the ones Patricia had destroyed. What if I transplanted mature trees like I did originally? I asked. Possible, but expensive. And finding 60-year-old specimens to transplant is extremely difficult. Most tree farms don't have stock that old. You could potentially transplant 20 or 30-foot trees, which would give you privacy much faster. How much would that cost? For 4 trees of that size, professionally installed with guarantees, probably $30,000 to $40,000. I did the math. Even with the settlement, I would be out of pocket. The remaining money would need to cover my actual legal fees beyond what the settlement covered, the ongoing property value loss, and the years of reduced privacy and enjoyment of my property. 2 weeks after the settlement was finalized, Mitchell called with an update on Patricia. "The district attorney filed charges," he said. 3 counts of fraud, 2 counts of forgery, and 1 count of embezzlement. She's looking at up to 5 years in prison if convicted on all counts." Will she actually go to prison? Probably not for a first offense, unless she has a history I don't know about. More likely she'll get probation, fines, and community service. But she'll have a criminal record, and the HOA has also filed a civil suit against her to recover the money she spent without authorization. What was the total she embezzled? Including your trees, about $32,000. Turns out she had been using HOA funds for personal expenses for months. Your tree removal was just the most egregious example. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that Patricia would face consequences for her actions, but it did not bring back my trees. The fence was completed in early November, just as the Oregon winter rains began in earnest. It provided privacy, but every time I looked at it, I saw what was missing. The fence was a barrier, artificial and lifeless. The trees had been part of the landscape, home to birds and squirrels, providing shade in summer and a windbreak in winter. David and other neighbors began referring to the incident as Treegate. Several people came by to express their sympathy and outrage. The Hendersons brought over a home-cooked meal. The Patels gave me a gift card to a local nursery. Bob Marshall, the board member, personally apologized for not catching Patricia's fraud sooner. "We should have been paying more attention," he said. "She was always pushy and controlling, but we thought she was just really dedicated to the community. We didn't realize she was using her position to pursue personal vendettas." The new HOA board met and voted to dissolve several of Patricia's more restrictive rules, including the tree height restrictions she had illegally implemented. They also voted to increase oversight of the president's authority, requiring board approval for any expenditure over $500 and any communication with homeowners regarding violations. In December, Patricia Montgomery's case went before a judge. Mitchell attended the hearing and called me afterward. She pleaded no contest to all charges, he said. The judge sentenced her to 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, restitution of $32,000 to the HOA, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Oregon. No jail time. No. First offense, she showed remorse, and her lawyer argued that she had acted impulsively without understanding the legal consequences. The judge accepted the plea deal the DA offered. It felt anticlimactic. Patricia had destroyed my property, forged documents, committed fraud, and she got probation. But I reminded myself that I had been made whole financially. She had lost her position of power, and she had a criminal record that would follow her for life. The money from the settlement allowed me to start planning for the future. I consulted with 3 different landscape architects about replacing the trees. The consensus was that transplanting 20-foot blue spruces would give me the best combination of immediate impact and long-term growth potential. They would provide decent privacy within a year and would reach full height within 10 to 15 years, instead of 20. In January, I pulled the trigger. $42,000 for 4 20-foot blue spruces, professionally installed with a 5-year growth guarantee. The installation took 2 days and required a crane truck to position the trees. When they were done, my property line once again had substantial greenery, though the trees were only half the height of what I had lost. I stood in my yard, looking at the new trees. They were beautiful in their own right, full and healthy and clearly well cared for, but they were not my trees. They were not the 60-year-old giants that had stood guard over my property. Those were gone forever. David came over to admire the new landscaping. "They look good," he said. "They do," I agreed, "but it's not the same." "Nothing ever is after someone takes something from you," David said, "but you fought back. You held her accountable, that matters." He was right. I had not just accepted the injustice. I had documented everything, hired professionals, and pursued every legal remedy available. Patricia had been removed from power, convicted of crimes, and forced to pay restitution. The HOA had reformed its governance. Other homeowners in the community felt empowered to push back against arbitrary rules. But more than that, I had learned something about property rights and community governance. HOAs exist to maintain property values and create pleasant communities, but they can be corrupted by individuals who confuse authority with power. The checks and balances that should exist in any organization had failed in Pinecrest, allowing one person to cause tremendous damage. In February, I received a check in the mail from Patricia Montgomery for $9,000. It was the first installment of her restitution payment to the HOA, which had been forwarded to me since I had already paid the settlement, and the HOA's insurance had covered most of their costs. There was no note, no apology, just a check. I deposited it and used the money to install an irrigation system for the new trees. Dr. Chen had recommended ensuring they received consistent water during their first few years to promote healthy root development. The irrigation system was automated, drawing from rain barrels I installed to collect runoff from my roof. Spring arrived, and the new trees began to flourish. They put on new growth, their branches filling out and reaching upward. The remaining original trees looked healthier too, as if they appreciated having companions again. Birds returned, building nests in the branches. Squirrels used the trees as highways through the yard. One morning in late March, I was drinking coffee on my deck when I saw a white Lexus drive slowly past my house. Patricia was at the wheel. She stared at my property, at the new trees and the fence, and I saw her expression twist into something bitter. Then she drove on, and I have not seen her since. Bob Marshall told me later that Patricia and her husband had put their house up for sale. They were moving to Arizona, where her husband had family. She could not escape her criminal record, but she could escape the daily reminder of her fall from grace. The Pinecrest HOA continued to function, but with a humility it had lacked before. The new president, a retired teacher named Margaret Sullivan, focused on actual community needs like maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events. No more petty rules about garage doors or decorative rocks. No more power trips or personal agendas. In May, the HOA held its annual meeting. Margaret asked me to attend and say a few words about the tree incident. I was reluctant, but David convinced me it was important. People need to hear your story, he said. They need to understand what can happen when they don't pay attention to who's running their HOA. So I went. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the park. About 40 homeowners attended, a much larger turnout than usual. Margaret introduced me, and I stood at the front of the room, feeling awkward and exposed. Most of you know what happened to my property last fall, I began. What you might not know is how easily it could have been prevented if the board had required approval for major decisions. If homeowners had demanded transparency about votes and rule changes. If anyone had questioned why the president was acting unilaterally on matters that affected private property. I told them about the morning I woke up to chainsaws, the shock of seeing my trees destroyed, the long process of seeking justice. I showed photos of the stumps, explained the arborist's valuation, and described the legal battle. The lesson isn't just about trees, I said. It's about vigilance. HOAs serve an important purpose, but they're made up of volunteers who have power over your property. You need to know what they're doing, hold them accountable, and speak up when something seems wrong. If you don't, you might wake up one day to find your property destroyed because someone decided their personal desires mattered more than your rights. The room was silent when I finished. Then someone started clapping and others joined in. It felt strange to receive applause for being a victim, but I understood what they were responding to. I had stood up. I had fought back. I had won. After the meeting, several homeowners came up to thank me and share their own stories of HOA overreach in other communities. One woman had been fined repeatedly for having the wrong color mailbox until she researched the rules and discovered the restriction had never been properly voted on. A man had been told to remove his vegetable garden because it was unsightly, even though there was no rule against gardens. Another couple had been threatened with a lien on their house for parking violations that were not actually violations. These stories reinforced what I had learned. HOAs could be helpful organizations, but they required constant oversight from the homeowners they supposedly served. By June, my new trees had grown noticeably. Dr. Chen came by for a follow-up inspection and pronounced them extremely healthy. You should have excellent privacy within 2 years, she said, and within 5 years you won't even remember they're not the original trees. I doubted that last part, but I appreciated her optimism. The final piece of the story came together in July, almost exactly 9 months after the tree destruction. Mitchell called to let me know that Patricia had completed her plea deal requirements early. She had finished her community service hours, paid her restitution in full, and was officially on probation for the remainder of her sentence. She's also officially moved to Arizona, Mitchell said. According to the HOA lawyer, she sold her house at a loss because she was desperate to leave. The new owners seem nice, and they're apparently thrilled with their view of Mount Hood, thanks to your former trees. There was bitter irony in that. Patricia had destroyed my property to improve her view, faced criminal charges, lost her position, paid significant fines, and fled the state in disgrace. And the people who ultimately benefited from the view were strangers who had nothing to do with any of it. "Do you think she learned anything from this?" I asked Mitchell. He was quiet for a moment. "I doubt it. People like Patricia Montgomery rarely do. They think they were unlucky or that they were persecuted for trying to help. They don't really internalize that they were wrong." So somewhere in Arizona, there's an HOA that's going to get a very enthusiastic volunteer. "Probably," Mitchell agreed, "but at least she can't do any damage in Oregon." As summer progressed, my property transformed. The new trees filled out beautifully. The fence weathered to a perfect gray-brown that blended naturally with the landscape. And I planted native shrubs and flowers in the areas where the original tree stumps had been ground down. My yard became a small ecosystem, buzzing with bees and butterflies, alive with birdsong. David and I sat on my deck one evening in August, almost a year after the incident began. The sun was setting behind my new trees, casting long shadows across the yard. Traffic noise from the main road was noticeable but not overwhelming. In a few more years, the trees would block most of it. "You ever regret buying here?" David asked. I thought about it. The tree incident had been traumatic and expensive. Even with the settlement, I had lost something irreplaceable. But I had also discovered that I had a good community, neighbors who cared, and the ability to stand up for myself against injustice. "No," I said finally. "I love this house. I love this property. What happened was terrible, but it taught me something important." "What's that?" "That property rights mean something. That standing up to bullies matters. That communities work when people pay attention and hold leaders accountable. And that trees, even new ones, always grow back." David raised his beer bottle. "To growing back." I clinked my bottle against his. "To growing back." The next morning, I woke up to sunlight filtering through my bedroom window. I made coffee and went outside to check on the trees. They were thriving, their needles a deep blue-green, their branches reaching confidently toward the sky. I touched the trunk of the nearest tree, feeling the rough bark under my palm. These were not the trees I had lost, but they were mine. I had chosen them, planted them, and would watch them grow for years to come. In a way, they represented something better than what I had before. They were not just trees, they were a symbol of resilience and justice. The HOA had tried to take something from me, and I had made them pay. Patricia Montgomery had thought her position gave her the right to destroy my property, and she had learned otherwise. The community had been shaken out of its complacency and had reformed its governance. And I had $50,000 in actual damages, plus costs, plus satisfaction. The trees would never be exactly what they had been, but justice had been served. As I stood there in my yard, coffee in hand, watching the morning sun illuminate my new trees, I felt something I had not felt in months: peace. The battle was over. I had won. And life went on, growing and changing and reaching always upward like the trees themselves. The mailman arrived with a small package. It was from Dr. Chen. Inside was a framed photograph she had taken of my property after the new trees were installed, with a note: "For your records, and to remind you that growth always follows destruction. Nature's justice is patient but certain." I hung the photo in my home office, right next to the photos of the destruction from that morning almost a year ago. Together, they told the complete story: violation and restoration, crime and justice, loss and recovery. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Margaret Sullivan, the new HOA president. The board wanted to plant a commemorative tree in the community park in honor of the reforms that had followed the tree incident. They wanted my input on species and location. I smiled and typed back that I would be happy to help. A dawn redwood, I suggested, a tree known for its resilience and longevity. Something that would still be standing long after all of us were gone, a living reminder that community governance requires vigilance and that property rights must be protected. Margaret replied immediately, "Perfect. Let's plant it this fall." And so, as autumn approached and the anniversary of that terrible morning drew near, I found myself looking forward rather than back. The new trees were healthy. Justice had been served. The community had learned its lesson. And somewhere, growing in the community park, there would soon be a tree that represented everything we had all learned from this experience. I thought about Patricia Montgomery sometimes, wondered if she ever reflected on what she had done and why it had gone so wrong. Probably not. People like her rarely did, but it did not matter. She was gone, her power stripped away, her legacy one of caution rather than leadership. The Pinecrest community was stronger for what had happened. Homeowners paid attention now. Board meetings had full attendance. Proposed rule changes were scrutinized and debated. The HOA had returned to its intended purpose, serving the community, not ruling it, and my trees grew, inch by inch, year by year, reaching toward their full potential. Just like justice itself, slow, patient, but inevitable when good people refuse to back down. That was the real lesson of the whole ordeal, not that HOAs were inherently bad or that all leaders would abuse their power. But that vigilance mattered. That standing up for what was right mattered. That documentation and evidence mattered. That knowing your rights and being willing to fight for them mattered most of all. I had lost 4 60-year-old trees. I had gained 4 healthy new trees, $50,000 in damages and costs, the satisfaction of seeing justice done, and the knowledge that I could stand up for myself when it mattered most. That seemed like a fair trade, all things considered. As the first leaves began to turn colors that September, I hosted a small gathering in my backyard. David and his wife, the Hendersons, the Patels, Bob Marshall and his husband, Margaret Sullivan, and several other neighbors came by for an evening of food and conversation. We stood around my new trees, drinks in hand, and Margaret made a small toast. To Yates, for reminding us all that communities work best when everyone does their part. And to these trees, which represent not just what was lost, but what we all gained: accountability, transparency, and respect for each other's rights. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt a swell of gratitude. This was what community was supposed to be. Not arbitrary rules and power games, but neighbors supporting each other, holding leaders accountable, and working together for common good. The evening stretched on, filled with laughter and stories. As darkness fell, solar lights I had installed around the trees began to glow, casting a warm light across the gathering. The trees stood tall in the darkness, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. They were not the trees I had planted 5 years ago. But they were mine, earned through struggle and perseverance. And they would be here long after this night, long after all of us growing steadily toward the sky. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.